There's something very special about the place. It has a certain magic to it. It's something that you don't find in many places. And I've been to quite a few different places, but this has a certain magic that you can't find anywhere else. And it's just that.
I'm Matthew Jebb, and my great-grandparents were Cecil and Maud Baring. Cecil and Maud had recently married when they were living on the continent in Paris, and they saw an advertisement in The Field magazine which simply stated "Island for sale" off the east coast of Ireland. And Cecil's ears pricked up immediately because he, whilst a banker by profession, he was besotted by natural history. That is where his real passions lay. He had visited remote islands, he had gone on expeditions into the Rocky Mountains in North America, and he travelled immediately to Dublin. He got a boat to take him out to the island in January of 1905, and he immediately recognised the potential of the island as a nature reserve, a place where nature was still flourishing without the impact of man. And on the spur of the moment, he bought the island, and within a few months it was his. And to him, this was a Galapagos island, an enchanted island, a place which he could make his own little kingdom.
Lambay is the biggest wildlife place on the whole east coast of Ireland, and it has about 50,000 guillemots in the summer, and in the winter the whole back of the island is covered in kittiwakes. And for the rest of the year then there's blackback seagulls, pheasants. They rear their own pheasants, and of course the biggest bird on the island is the gannet, and the gannets are fabulous birds. They stay together as a pair for 40 years as a couple. In the 1980s, Dublin Zoo had too many wallabies, and they brought 7 wallabies out, and last year there was about 150 wallabies here. They roam freely over all the back of the island, and there's loads of firs where they can sort of bed down for the night, you know, and they seem to just adapt great, you know. Yes, it would be the largest seal colony on the east coast. They have both types of seals. They have the common seal and the grey seal. And the best time to see the seals is when the tide is out and the fishing boats are in port.
So the island is steeped in history. It's been occupied by people for a good 6,000 or 7,000 years. And one of the most remarkable discoveries in the last 20 years or so has been a stone axe factory. That always sounds very peculiar to people, but during the Neolithic era, stone was quarried on the island and manufactured into beautiful polished axe heads. The stone that was used was something called porphyry, a stone that was much prized in the ancient world because of its attractive flecked pattern. It's a bluish greenish colour. It's a volcanic rock. It only forms in the bowels of a extinct volcano. Ever since that period, Lambay has remained of enormous strategic importance, and during the Tudor era the English were extremely anxious that neither the Scots nor the French would be able to seize Lambay and use it as a bridgehead through which to invade Ireland. During the age of sailing ships, it was always very difficult to get into Dublin Harbour, Dublin Bay. It was very shallow, it was difficult tacking inside Howth Head and Dalkey, and Lambay was used as a site where a ship could lay at anchor for a number of days until the weather was perfect for getting into Dublin Bay. So it was very important strategically as a site for a ship to rest up until such time as it was appropriate to sail into the bay. One of the extraordinary features of the harbour is just how big it is. When you visit the mainland opposite Lambay in Rush and Rogerstown, Portrane and so on, there are harbours, but they're essentially of the same scale. It appears out of all proportion to the size of the island. It was a very large harbour. And the reason it was so big is it was built and extended by the Coast Guards because this was regarded as a strategically important place in which to have Crown employees. The Coast Guards were watching for the potential for smuggling, but they would also notify the Admiralty of any goings on in an area. So the Coast Guard were an important outpost, if you like, of running the realm, the country as a whole. So unlike the rest of the island of Ireland, where the foreshore is state property, it's common land, the foreshore of Lambay is actually in private hands. It belongs to the Lambay estate, a situation that is not found elsewhere in the country. One of the earliest buildings on the island after the castle was this row of Coast Guard cottages. They had probably been built for different purposes when they first appeared, and we know that they were there during the Williamite Wars, at which point they were probably served as accommodation for guards and wardens on the island.
If you go to the census for 1901, which is prior to the bearings coming out here, the Coast Guard cottages were in use, and there was about 8 Coast Guardsmen living in the cottages, and they were living here with their families. There was also a shepherd, a land steward, and there was a family living in the castle itself. But the story is that the people who were living in the castle were actually only living in the upper floors of the castle because they had animals living in the bottom part of the castle. And so when Bearings bought this, they had to clean out the whole castle and start again and rebuild a lot of it. Then go to the 1911 census, you find that Lambay had a huge influx of people and that there was lots of people living in all the various cottages, but they also made use of all the farm buildings, and it appears they must have put up temporary turf houses for large numbers of workers. And if you go through the census for 1911 for Lambay, you'll find that there is over 100 people working on the island at different time periods. The farmyard during 1911 appears to be empty because on the census none of the buildings are classified as farm buildings. They're just classed as empty dwellings, whereas on the 1901 census each building is listed as having a use, as in stables, piggeries, chicken houses. So all of those buildings are no longer in use because there's so many people here just working on building the castle and building the guest wing.
The original castle building probably dates back to the 14th century, and it's an intriguing design because it has a central tower building and each of the corners has a little miniature flanker tower. They're quite small in dimensions, but each of them has a beautiful outer angle that is acute. It's just smaller than 90 degrees. And this extraordinary shape is referred to as a star fort. When you see it in plan view, you realize that the effect of a star fort means that it's impossible to hide around one of the corners. You will always be visible to one of the facing walls from the opposite flanker tower. And this allowed this design of building to be defended by a minimum of men. So 8 musket men could have defended the keep of Lambay against all comers. It meant it was very robust against being sieged. The other extraordinary feature is all of the first floors are built on stone. So the ceilings of the ground floor are arched stone. And again, this meant that the building was one that you couldn't set fire to burn the occupants out. And lastly, the other extraordinary feature is that there was no internal staircase. All around the building are these beautiful lead rain hoppers. These are very ornamental in that some of them are so positioned that they're never going to trap any water. These rain hoppers represent all sorts of extraordinary thoughts and ideas on many levels. There's very clearly the three castellated parts to the castle. This represents the central tower and the two little flanker towers that you would see from each face. But it also represents the arms of the city of Dublin, the three towers. And then written across it, a combination of the year that the building was finished, MCMX 1910, and then in the central portion, CMB, Cecil and Maud Baring, a little monogram to cover their names. So this was, you know, a beautiful construction with layers of meaning in it. One of the remarkable features of Lambay Castle is that the approach is across a grassy meadow. There is no roadway leading to a door into the castle. And you enter through this remarkable encircling wall filled with a mature woodland. And in the summer months, this is a haven of bird life and stillness, even on a windy day. It is in many ways an island within an island.
This was the main fruit and vegetable garden for the island, but I also think it was a fruit garden and a vegetable garden for the castle prior to Lutyens or anybody coming here. And so it was in use for the castle going quite a way back. You look round the gardens, you can actually see the old design, and each separate segment of the garden was set in a way that it represented each of the different suits of cards. So you have hearts, clubs, diamonds and spades, and the garden is set into 4 separate squares, and then there's a walkway around the centre of it as well. This garden is pretty overgrown at the moment, but the aim is to try and re-establish this garden and get it back to the standard that it was before. The fruit trees are in very good condition. The shrubberies are not so good. And the hearts, clubs, diamonds and spades have all disappeared. The gardens around the castle are gradually being moved back to the style that they were before, Gertrude Jekyll's plan.
The castle is surrounded by an intricate series of walled courtyards and terraces. And these remarkable gardens give the illusion of a huge space because you are constantly entering a new area. Gertrude Jekyll, who worked with Edwin Lutyens, had a fantastic colour theory of planting, whereby the eye needed to be refreshed with a different sort of palette of colours. And these courtyards played very much to that strength. The current chapel was probably built in the 1840s, replacing an earlier church, because there is evidence that there would have been a very early Christian settlement on the island. But this 1840s church was very striking. When the Barings bought the island, it was a whitewashed building with big Gothic sash windows, completely out of keeping with the aesthetic that Barings wanted for the island as a whole. So it was a project that they long planned to deal with, and they altered it in a very dramatic fashion. The original building sits exactly as it did then, but they have filled in the windows and left very small windows that essentially replicate the tiny mullion windows of the castle. And then they have added this Greek portico, this Doric. It looks like a little Greek temple. And it's a very striking sight. But this is all being cut from island stone, from porphyry again. And it is a beautiful classical building, but done in a sort of a rustic manner that enables it to blend in perfectly with the landscape. Having witnessed a number of people being buried on the island, I can tell you that that graveyard is full of human bones. There is a huge number of people buried in it, very few headstones by comparison, and the archaeologists have also used remote sensing, using sort of ground penetrating radar, to indicate that there are a number of large square pits quite close to the entrance gate today, and it's very likely that a lot of the people who died on the Taylor, the wreck of the Taylor on the back of the island in the 19th century, are buried there as well. So it is a graveyard that is full of members of my own extended family, people that I grew up with on the island who worked on the farm there, and it carries with it therefore, you know, a tremendous sense of pleasure, because it's got a lookout of the entire mainland, of the rest of the island. It sits on a promontory to the southwest of the island, and it's got a beautiful view of the island as a whole, but also of the mainland. So it is a very, very romantic setting. If you wish to be buried anywhere, what could be a nicer final resting spot? The greatest pleasure I take in the island is nothing's changed. I think all of us fear most in our lives when things are altered, when a building disappears, a tree blows down, a new building is put up. These are very unsettling to us. And the fact that I can go back and see rocks and steps that I remember from my childhood is fantastically comforting and reassuring.